Welcome everyone to LexTalk podcast. This is season 6, episode 9.
Great to be back. We're really excited to have you join us for another deep dive today.
Absolutely. And today we are tackling a really fascinating topic using a bunch of sources you sent over. We've got notes for this episode focusing on language and gender and communication.
And also some excerpts from a pretty comprehensive analysis piece on the exact same subject. So lots to dig into.
That's right. These sources give us a really sharp look into how gender might influence the way we use language.
Yeah, not just, in general chats, but specifically in educational contexts. Think English language classrooms.
So our mission today, we want to sort of cut through the noise, pull out the key insights, the main theories, and maybe most importantly, the practical takeaways these sources offer up.
Basically, what do they tell us about how gender shapes communication, especially when people are learning?
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's dive into these sources and see what they reveal about this whole intersection.
Sounds good.
So, right off the bat, the sources seem to hit us with that core question. Do men and women actually speak differently?
Yeah, they jump right in. And the answer, based on everything here, seems to be yes, but. And this is a big but.
There's a distinction, right?
Exactly. The sources are really clear. We do see gendered patterns in language. Absolutely. But they argue pretty convincingly, I think, that these patterns come from society.
Not biology.
Not biology. It's about the roles we play, the expectations people have, how we're kind of socialized into using language certain ways.
That distinction feels really important. And they don't just state it, they give examples, right?
Oh, yeah, tangible examples.
Yeah.
They mention things often described as women's language, like using more tag questions, adding isn't it or right onto a statement.
Uh-huh. And hedging, too, using words like maybe or sort of.
Exactly. And just various politeness strategies in general.
Okay, and conversely, for men.
Well, the patterns often linked to men's language in these particular sources include things like more direct statements, maybe a higher chance of interrupting someone.
Okay.
And using more assertive language, maybe even commands. But again, these are observations about patterns. Patterns the sources trace back to social roles and maybe power dynamics, not something innate.
And they gave that classroom example, which really kind of nails it down, I thought.
Oh, yeah. The classroom one is good.
You might see female students in a discussion, maybe starting off with, well, I think, or perhaps we could try, sort of softening the point.
Right. While in that very same discussion, maybe male students are quicker to jump in, state an answer more definitively, perhaps take up more airtime in the group.
It's a very relatable picture, isn't it? How these wider societal things can just pop up right there in a classroom.
Totally. It shows how it manifests.
So to really get why we see these things, the sources seem to emphasize looking at the history, the theories behind it all.
Definitely. It's not a new question. People have been thinking about this for a while, and the ideas have, evolved.
They trace that evolution, mentioning some early models, like deficit, dominance.
Yes, the deficit, dominance, and difference models. They were foundational, kind of set the stage, but they had their limitations, definitely.
Which brings us to specific names, specific theorists mentioned in the sources. Robin Lakoff is first, from way back in 1975.
Lakoff, yeah. Her book, Language and Woman's Place, was huge. Really put this whole topic on the academic map. She suggested that women's language, as it was seen, was, more polite, more indirect, focused on emotional expression.
But there were critiques.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The sources note that while her work kicked off tons of research really vital, it also got criticized. Some felt it framed women's language as inherently weaker or, deficient compared to a male standard.
Okay, so that leads into Deborah Tannen. Her difference theory in 1990 offered a different angle.
Right. Tannen's idea, famously, contrasted men's report talk, which she saw as focused on conveying information, facts.
Like reporting.
Exactly. Versus women's rapport talk, which was seen as more about building connections, maintaining relationships, rapport.
That makes sense. It explains misunderstandings differently, right?
Yeah.
Not as deficiency, but different goals.
Precisely. Different conversational goals. But then the sources also bring in more modern views, like Deborah Cameron from 2007.
And Cameron's work, as the sources explain it, kind of pushes back against those neat binaries. Men do this, women do that.
Yeah, strongly. She really emphasizes that context is king. The power dynamics in a specific interaction, who the speakers are, their individual choices. These factors are often way more important than just saying because they're male or because
Hmm.
they're female.
That feels more complex, more nuanced.
It is. And they also mentioned Janet Holmes. Her work looks specifically at power versus solidarity in conversations.
Power versus solidarity. How does that work?
Well, her research highlights how our language choices often show what we're trying to achieve. Are we asserting authority, showing power? Or are we trying to build connection, show agreement solidarity? It's another lens, beyond just gender.
So it seems like the more current thinking influenced by what the sources call social constructivism.
Right, the idea that gender itself is largely shaped by society and culture, not just biology.
Yeah, that view encourages us to look less at just male versus female and more at the roles people are playing in that moment.
Exactly. Their position, the power dynamics, the specific social setting, it's a shift in focus.
That feels like a really key insight from these sources, a more sophisticated way to analyze communication.
And this is where it gets, I think, really interesting, applying all these ideas specifically to education, especially, ESL, EFL classrooms.
Yes, this part felt super practical for anyone teaching. The sources talk about how teacher-student interactions might be subtly gendered.
hmm Like who gets called on more often, who gets more detailed feedback, maybe more encouragement or more criticism.
And they point to those potential patterns in classroom participation, too. Maybe seeing girls tending towards collaboration, working well in pairs.
While perhaps boys might be, quicker to shout out an answer or take more turns when it's a whole class thing. These are tendencies, of course, not rules.
But it highlights how easily, maybe even unconsciously, teachers or the way a class is set up could end up reinforcing those societal stereotypes if we're not careful.
Absolutely. And the sources really stress the impact this can have. Think about learner confidence, performance.
Right. If a student feels like their way of communicating isn't as valued, maybe because of these gendered expectations, it could definitely make them less willing to speak up.
For sure. Which leads to a really practical tip the sources offer educators.
Yeah.
Actually track participation.
Like keep a tally.
Yeah, gather some simple data. Who's talking? How much? Just seeing it objectively can reveal patterns you weren't even aware of.
And then what?
Then you can be proactive. Use strategies like structured pair work, assign specific roles in group tasks so everyone has a function, maybe use think, pair, share, or call on students randomly, things to balance it out.
That makes sense. And the other source, the broader analysis, mentioned cultural background playing a role too.
Yes, that was an important point. It mentioned case studies comparing different educational settings, reminding us that these gender dynamics aren't set in stone. They can look quite different depending on the cultural context of the school and the students.
Okay, so we've identified patterns, looked at theories, seen classroom implications. The sources also move into a really important area now, inclusive language.
Yeah, the growing movement towards gender neutral and, well, just generally more inclusive ways of speaking and writing.
This feels like it reflects a much broader societal shift, right? Recognizing non-binary experiences, LGBTQ plus perspectives.
Definitely. It's about making language itself a better, more respectful tool to represent everyone.
And the sources give concrete examples of this in education, like using they, them as a singular pronoun.
Right. Or schools developing inclusive language policies.
Yeah.
Even just raising awareness in how we give feedback, making sure we're not using gendered assumptions when we praise or correct students.
They had some practical tips here, too, for teachers, like checking textbooks and materials for biased examples or, say, role-play dialogues.
Yeah, being mindful of that. And maybe using students' names instead of pronouns where possible, unless, of course, a student has shared their pronouns.
And crucially, just respecting self-identification, letting students tell you how they should be referred to.
That creates that safer space, doesn't it, where students feel genuinely seen and respected.
So let's try and tie this all together. What does this deep dive into these sources really mean for English language teachers and learners day to day?
Well, the sources pull out several key implications. A really big one is just the need for critical awareness. Teachers need to actively look at their own practices, their materials.
And avoid reinforcing stereotypes, whether it's in a textbook example, an activity they design, or even just how they talk to students.
Exactly. And more than that, help students become critical thinkers too. Get them analyzing gender in media, ads, movie scripts, interviews.
So using the content itself as a learning tool for both language and social awareness.
Precisely. And promoting respect for diverse identities. choosing topics and materials that reflect the real, diverse world our students live in and will need to communicate in.
Ultimately, it comes back to the classroom environment, doesn't it?
It really does. Creating that safe, supportive space where every single student feels like their voice matters, that they'll be heard, respected, regardless of their gender or gender expression.
And the sources mentioned this connects to bigger things like textbook analysis, adapting materials, and definitely teacher training on bias.
Yes, all crucial pieces.
Okay, so wrapping up this dive into the sources you shared, the big takeaway seems crystal clear. Gender does significantly shape language and communication.
But, and it's the crucial, but again, that influence comes mostly from society, from roles,
Yeah.
expectations, power dynamics.
Not from biology. Understanding that difference is vital.
And actively using language to empower and include everyone seems to be the way forward suggested here.
It definitely makes you think about your own communication, how you speak, how you listen. And if you are an educator listening,
It's a powerful prompt, isn't it, to look really closely at your classroom? Are all those voices genuinely being heard equally? How might these patterns we've talked about be playing out, maybe unconsciously?
yeah, the sources really drive home that language has this incredible power. It can just reflect the status quo, the existing gender norms.
Or it could be used proactively as a tool to challenge those norms, to build something more equitable, more inclusive for everybody. That feels like the call to action here for educators, maybe even policymakers.
A really important message. And looking ahead, the sources tell us our next deep dive, which wraps up this season of Lex Talk.
Season finale. It's going to focus on the future of English linguistics research. Should be fascinating to see what's on the horizon.
Definitely looking forward to that. But before we sign off today, there's a reminder embedded right here in our source notes for everyone listening.
Ah, yes, the practicalities.
Don't forget to follow Lex Talk on all the platforms. We're on our website, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, SoundCloud, Spotify. Just search at Lex Talk Podcast.
Stay connected. And as we've been thinking today about making sure every voice is heard,
Think about your own classroom. Are all voices heard equally? Let's talk. Let's learn. Let's Lex Talk.